I wanted to research whether or not our lives are basically like predestined by the circumstances that we're born into, mostly financially. And throughout this, I've discovered that there's a cynical side of the argument and the idealist side of the argument. The cynist might say that basically you have no choice once you're born into the life you're born into. And the idealist might say that anything's possible. The way I went into this was sort of the cynical side of the argument, and judging by the books that I read, it kind of went along with that also. I read Les Miserables by Victor Hugo, and it basically traces the lives of primarily French peasants during the French Revolution. And looking at it point blank, none of them really escape the financial situation that they're born into, or at least the effects of the financial situation they're born into. And I also read This Side of Paradise by Fitzgerald, which, on the opposite side of the spectrum, but still kind of parallel, it's about a like posh and pampered society boy who ends up chasing exactly what he's born into also, and he always wants the status and the wealth. But once I kind of backed up and looked at them, I realized that it's not just determined by one roll of the dice. Because you could say that when you're born, you have three options, give or take. You're born into poverty, let's go with that, in this society. You're born into poverty, you grow up, you go to basic public school, but eventually you're forced to try and figure out how to make it on your own, drop out of school, and remain in that same cycle of poverty. You're born into the middle class. You probably are going to a public school or a small private school, probably close to your hometown. You go to a university near your hometown, based on maybe a few scholarships, but probably not a lot because you're going to the public school or private school near your hometown, and end up pretty much reliving your parents' lives. Or you're born into high society. You're probably going to a nice private school, which means you're probably going to be going to a nice university, which means that you're probably going to end up living your parents' lives. But when I looked at it in a different way, I realized that it's not just based on that. Because life is a bunch of random and weird things that are even stranger than the two works of fiction that I looked at. Because ultimately, even in those books, they were still mostly defined by their choices. And at certain points, they were living in different financial situations, and they were happy and they were sad. And so I realized that it's not just based on one roll of the dice, it's also based on a chance encounter, your work ethic, and virtually any other number of choices or decisions or just chance happenings. And also another thing that I noticed about this, I was going to play a song by Ray Charles called Them That Got. It basically just goes on this concept. One line in the song is, you gotta get something before you can get something, but how you get the first is still a mystery to me. And I was thinking about that, and then I thought of how ironic it is that it's a Ray Charles song, because we all know that Ray Charles ended up having a pretty successful life, because we all know who Ray Charles is. But I mean, he was born into poverty, his family all died off by the time he was 16, he was blind at the age of 11, I think. But because of strange chance encounters, at one point in his life he got on a bus and went to Atlanta just because it was the farthest bus he could get to from his hometown in Florida. And from there he ended up chasing music, and it ended up working out for him pretty well. So I guess to wrap this all up, I guess throughout this project I learned that although a certain amount of your life is determined by your circumstances that you don't really get to decide, there's a lot of your life that isn't. So yeah, here's to the adventure of life. That's all I got.